signal now for when I'm needed. But when that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning to them.
Yes, sir. Welcome to the Gotham Chronicles Beyond the Bat Signal. I am your host, Domenic Iannicca. Join me as we dive into the depths of Batman's lore, dissecting the Rogues Gallery, and going deep into the Batcave and uncovering the stories and mysteries of our iconic vigilante known as the Dark Knight. Now, before we begin, I just want to thank each of you for tuning into today's episode. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot me an email at beyondthebatsignal@gmail.com. You can also follow Beyond the Bat Signal on X/Twitter at BeyondBatSignal. And feel free to rate and review the show. You could do that on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Amazon Music, as it always helps spread the word and kind of helps with the show. So what are we talking about today? Today's show is going to be about Icons Unearthed Batman episodes 3 and 4. And kind of eye-opening at some parts. A lot of it was kind of things that I've heard before. But I wanted to share it because I think reliving, even especially Batman Returns, Batman Forever, two films I love. They're not in my top 5. But very fond memories of each of them, especially as part of my childhood, as I'm sure many of you have watched and adored for many different reasons. I mean, Batman Returns is something that I watch every single Christmas. And that final scene with Bruce Wayne, where he's like, "Merry Christmas, Alfred," and goodwill towards men and women. I just love that line. But anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. So episode 3 kind of kicks off as to, what happens with, the process of, I guess it's the aftermath of Batman 89, how it's such success. And then WB Studios gives the keys to Tim Burton. Now, if you're familiar with Tim Burton, he's got a very unique style. But recognizable and visually it's appealing, but very different from many other directors where it is kind of creepy. It's a little out there, outlandish. I would say wacky, but it's very unique in the sense that no other director can kind of mimic what he does. And his ideas, I guess let's talk about where it starts off with the story. Like, his motto was to humanize the monsters, and so to humanize the monsters, but then for humans, it was to monsterize the humans. So that was his motto going into Batman Returns. And before he would begin any film, Tim Burton always kind of would draw. Like, these are what I would like the characters to kind of look like. And for Batman Returns, he drew, they showed an image of the Penguin, and oh my God. You immediately see Danny DeVito's character right there. It looks exactly to what he drew. And then when they were talking about certain things like casting and whatnot, which I'll discuss more about, but I guess we'll talk about, what the story was. And there were certain things that I had no idea about. One of them being Max Schreck. So, the Penguin, he originally had a brother who was going to be a blonde hair, blue-eyed boy. And it was going to be actually Max Schreck. And when it was being written, they wanted to ensure that nothing from that first Batman 89 film would kind of carry over to Batman Returns. They kind of wanted to make it its own individual movie. But if you recall watching Batman Returns, they do have a brief mention of Vicky Vale where she's being brought down into the Batcave by Alfred. And anyway, Bruce is having that conversation with Alfred in Batman Returns. But that is the only time that they have like a little carryover. Now, speaking of Vicky Vale, let's talk about Sean Young, who makes another appearance here, which was interesting. She was heard about there's going to be a role for Batman Returns, and it's going to be for Catwoman. So she's like, well, you know what? I fell off the horse, broke my neck, and I feel like I deserve another crack at this. And she made a pitch, a wild pitch. She did not shy away. She was very forward as to who she wanted to be and what role she wanted to play, and she felt like she was fully deserving of it. But however, I will say that in her words, she said, you know, WB Studios didn't even really want a conversation. So she kind of had to force her way into having a conversation where Tim and Michael Keaton were sitting down at WB Studios, and Sean Young pretty much dressed the role and showed up acting the role of Catwoman. And it was something like, her words were, you have been a naughty, naughty boy. You know, in that very much like playing as Catwoman. And safe to say that she didn't even get a call back. Another interesting thing, which I had no idea about, she even went on a talk show. The name is slipping my mind, but she fully dressed up as Catwoman and embraced everything that Catwoman is and just completely went in character. And that was her pitch. She fully was not hiding anything at all as to, you know, what role she wanted or didn't want. But like, no, she was like, I want to be Catwoman and I deserve it. And she even fully says it on the documentary, which I thought was fascinating. You know, obviously there was someone who was hired on, not named Michelle Pfeiffer at first, but we'll get to that. Actually, the individual that was hired, her name was Annette Bening. And the only reason why she had to actually force herself, well, not even force herself, but back out of the role was 2 weeks prior to filming. And it seems like this is like a reoccurring theme for like the female lead role. Not breaking necks by any means. It's actually quite the opposite. A good occasion. She was pregnant. So due to those circumstances where she obviously it's going to be a physical role and she could not harm herself or her baby at the time, she had to back out of the role. And in comes Michelle Pfeiffer. According to Denise Denovi, she actually had a superstition. So she was like, well, you know what? The person who's meant to get it is actually meant to be. Meaning whoever comes in through that door, this is the person that's going to be meant for this role. No different from Vicky Vale, where it was Kim Basinger who took over. And, you know, it's almost hard to imagine Kim Basinger not being Vicky Vale in Batman 89. Same thing with Michelle Pfeiffer. And, you know, I was actually talking to my wife about this, where I was like, because we were watching it together, and she's like, I love Michelle Pfeiffer. She was one of my favorite actresses growing up. And I'm like, wait till they, and I had a feeling, because they always seem to mention it, is where they, she was an absolute natural. Like, and they were talking, like, you know, even when she was using a whip, and she was able to use the whip to take off the mannequin's heads just so naturally, and all within the first try. It blew everybody away. Now, you're probably thinking, because I know from the previous podcast, I mentioned that Michael Keaton was like, absolutely no way Michelle Pfeiffer is going to be Vicky Vale. If you recall, she was considered originally for Michelle Pfeiffer was considered for Vicky Vale, but unfortunately, Michael Keaton and his then wife split up. So there was no issue that, he had no issue with Michelle Pfeiffer coming on and playing Catwoman. It was a welcome addition. And the studio absolutely loved her. Everything that she did, her acting, even just the portrayal of Catwoman. And they immediately thought we have a star in our hands. Like, this is a gem that we, after the screenings that they did, they were just blown away. Like, this woman is wearing 5-inch heels, and according to Denise Denovi, she says ridiculously talented with a whip. Like, again, first try and you're knocking all these mannequins' heads off. Go back, watch the film, and you tell me, like, that is her. No stunts, nothing. It was just all her. Ridiculously talented. And then obviously, like, her actually putting a bird in her mouth, like, certain things are just how committed she was to the role. And you fully believed it, right? Like, in all honesty, like, who was the highlight of that Batman Returns film? I would even argue, like, Michelle Pfeiffer, I think, was probably the star of that film. Michael Keaton obviously did a great job, but it's hard to say with him because he's almost like an afterthought. Like Danny DeVito, we'll get into him in just a moment as to like the level of commitment that these actors and actresses had. So Christopher Walken took the role of Max Schreck. And, that guy is a legend in himself, but they absolutely loved him. And it was just the way he talks. And he has such a distinct way of talking. Everyone can recall his voice. Hard to do his voice, though. Only few can actually mimic it. But, when they were listening to the way he was acting, they were like, wow, this guy's talking like he has rhythm. And they're like, how do you talk like that? He's like, it's like dancing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? 1, 2. So, and that's what his explanation was. The way I talk is like the way I dance. And because he used to dance and he has that type of rhythm. So if you go back and again, watch the film, he has like a certain pace as to how he talks. Now, going to Danny DeVito, another star of this film, he absolutely went all in on this role. Tim Burton did not see anyone else other than Danny DeVito playing the Penguin. And the level of commitment that he did in terms of, the patience of putting the makeup on, even like they were saying that, the scheduling, they had an X amount of months. I forget the number, and they were well over that number. And, he was still there. Obviously, he's getting a little frustrated and a little worn out, and which rightfully so. He was wearing a bodysuit and, constantly putting the makeup on day in, day out, being in character. So that was the other thing that they mentioned was Danny DeVito was the Penguin in between scenes. And he would do certain things like try to make those squawking sounds like a penguin. And then the other thing that they made note of was, Pee Wee Herman, the guy who played Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens. He was offered the role for Penguin's father, right? And Paul Rubens was like going through a few things, but Tim Burton directed Pee Wee Herman as one of his first films, and was like, "Listen, why don't you come on over? We'll film you. You're going to be Penguin's parent, the Penguin's father." So that was like a nice little bone that he gave him. And again, Robin was supposed to, just like he was supposed to be in the first film, but didn't make it in. Same thing. Robin was in the script for Batman Returns, and then he was taken out. Marlon Wayans was casted and was taken out. Now, on a side note, there is the Batman 89 comic book that's out there right now, and right now that they have Echoes. I haven't been reading Echoes at all, but I know if you can take a look at Batman 89's comic book, which is written by Sean Hamm and drawn or illustrated by Joe Quinones. And the stories, I don't know, I was a fan of it. I would probably give it a 7.5 out of 10, 7, in the B range. it wasn't earth shattering, groundbreaking, or anything like that, but the art was fantastic. And I don't know, I was a big fan of the art. Highly recommend that you do take a look on an app that the Batman Book Club has put me on, and I absolutely love it. Hoopla. Definitely check it out. All you need is your library card. Anyway, unpaid advertisement right there. So with that said, I mean, Robin again was supposed to make it to the film, didn't make it, and because they thought that there was too many characters in that film, right? You have two, villains, plus there's obviously Batman, and then the side characters. Even Max Schreck is also a villain, I would assume. So 3. Now, Tim Burton. He didn't want to go back to Pinewood Studios where they filmed the first Batman film. He wanted to do it a bit more local. So moving to studios, they needed to hire a production designer where, they wanted to show new aspects of Gotham City, something different. One obviously being that it's during Christmas time, so it's a different feeling, a different aspect, which I felt like they kind of captured. It was like more of like a gothic New York feel, especially like around that tree. And the level of detail and commitment that each of these people had, like this must have been so uncomfortable, where they air conditioned the sets to show that it was absolutely freezing there. And you could see, like when people were talking, like it was so cold that you could fully see your own breath. And that's what they wanted. And no wonder. I mean, they coined Dan DeVito as a trooper, right? And rightfully so. I feel like acting in the cold is already uncomfortable. Being in the cold in general is just uncomfortable. So I'm from Canada. Believe me, like it's not that it's always cold here in Toronto, but the days that it is, I hate it. Right. But with that said, that's the level of commitment and detail that they wanted to put into that film. Now, speaking of detail, like even Danny DeVito, like he was like, they suggested, do you want to put bile in your mouth? Because let's try to make you look a little bit more nasty. And he's like, yeah, sure. Let's do it. Fully committed to the role. And then, they had Sean Hamm, and then Wesley Strick was also hired to put the finishing touches on the script. So, they added a few things that might have been just a little different to make it a little, not political. I forget what it was that Bruce Wayne said something about. It was that conversation that him and Selena were having by the fire. But I think he even mentioned something like about Ted Bundy, and that was like those small little touches that they added to the script. And then they talk about the mechanical penguins, and then like there were some that were real, some that were fake, and so detailed that even the penguins believed, wow, like, are you one of us? Another thing that I thought was interesting, where again, going back to DeVito, like, where he goes and he gets the umbrella and he's like, oh, gotta run, gotta fly. And then you see the umbrella kind of just like break apart, twist into like what it looks like a helicopter. Well, he ended up getting stuck on set. So they had to help him down, which I thought was hilarious. But Danny DeVito definitely put in a bunch of hours, and they've reiterated that on the documentary a few times. But yeah. Again, like there was Danny Elfman who did the score once again. This time they didn't bring Prince back or anything like that. But Danny Elfman was very picky as to certain scenes, as to like how he wanted to deliver it. And I fully support it. And if you can recall where it's right at the beginning of the film where the bat signal shines light, and obviously Bruce, it seems like he's just sitting down and waiting for the call, and then the lights shine on him. Well, that background or that drop into the Batman theme was what Danny Elfman wanted. He goes to the guys who were editing the film. He was like, "Can you make that scene a little bit longer? How about a little bit longer? Okay, I just need a little bit longer." So if you go watch that film, right, and it's when Bruce stands up is when there's that big drop. Dun dun. Love it. And no wonder that Danny Elfman was so picky. He was like, listen, trust me, just please make it just a little bit longer. So going back to Michelle Pfeiffer, obviously I told you that the studio was absolutely blown away. And they were like, well, we have a gem on our hands, and what if we want to make another film about her? Right? So obviously at the end of the Batman Returns film, she died, with Max Schreck. So what they did was they're like, listen, we have a gem on our hands, and let's produce another film. So they had a script. There was one script that was written, and it was going to be, the role was for Michelle. And what happened was that the studio was insisted. They're like, listen, maybe Catwoman has one more life in her. So they issued prints of all these movies already sent out. However, they were like, we need to add one more scene. And this one scene costed $250,000. And it's the one right at the end where you'll see Catwoman, the bat signal shines, and then all you see is her head kind of pop up. And that's where Catwoman could still, there's that question, Catwoman's still alive, right? And they were going to make a spin-off movie based on Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. And anyway, so they reprinted all the film, sent them out, added that shot in, and, the movie was a success, right? It made $47 million on the first week. That said, the movie also had a lot of backlash. And I don't know if it was rightfully deserved. I mean, yes, there was a lot of knocks, right? Was it a darker film? Absolutely. Definitely a Tim Burton feel. The two films felt completely different. Batman Returns did feel like a Tim Burton movie. It was a little bit more sexualized, based on certain comments, which definitely went over my head as a kid. But then you kind of catch on. You're like, oh wow, they said that in a kids movie. McDonald's obviously did not want anything to do with Batman Returns. Actually, they were like, yeah, these toys are actually for Batman the Animated Series because they came around the same time. And then there was you have Danny DeVito, who looks scary as it was. And then, you have that little bile going down his mouth, the way he talked. A lot more blood in this film. And it considered dark for a lot of kids, right? Parents didn't want to bring their kids to something like this. So needless to say, although the film was a success, Michelle Pfeiffer's movie, the Catwoman movie, got canceled. And they were said, listen, unfortunately, she was actually pretty upset about it. And then Tim Burton afterwards walked away from Batman. And the reasons for that was because, so they said, listen, we're going to make a Batman 3. And this is going into Batman Forever here. And Tim Burton had a meeting with WB. And they were like, we want you to make it a bit more lighter. And they had a bunch of more ideas. And Tim just kind of looked at him like, you don't really want me to make this film, do you? So he kind of just walked away. So instead of hiring him as a director, they just asked him to be more of a producer, right? They hired Joel Schumacher. So Joel Schumacher, according to this documentary, was actually a unique choice. WB asked Joel, let's make this a lot less violent, a lot less dark, and we need to sell merchandise. So imagine a film being surrounded by based on, we need to sell more toys. Instead of focusing on, let's make a good film. It is wild to think nowadays. I'd be absolutely livid as a fan. Did I like Batman Forever? Absolutely. And I'm kind of curious as to what you think. What are your thoughts on Batman Forever? Because I feel like it is divisive, but it was considered a massive success. Anyway, Michael Uslan, they actually bring him back, and he fully understood as to where WB was coming from. Right? Even in his words in the first episode of that documentary, he was like, listen, I want us to sell toys. I want us to sell comic books. I want us to sell movies and TV shows. And, the backlash, and it was massive backlash from like a lot of fans. They didn't want this dark and kind of like scary Batman film. They didn't. So Michael Uslan, even though he said he wanted a dark Batman, he understood where WB was coming from. And the key ingredient was to appeal to children. So what did they do? Well, naturally, you get someone who's a bit more relatable than Batman. You bring in Robin. So, and Robin relates really well to kids, right? He's supposed to be a bit younger, and people can be like, well, I can't be Batman because he's older. He's like my dad, but like, yeah, I could be Robin. So that's why they brought him in. Again, you're trying to appeal to a much younger audience. You want them to buy your toys. It's still crazy to say. And you want McDonald's to be on your good side. And we'll talk about the merchandise after, because it was so good. So the writers of Lee and Janet Scott, was it Batchelor? Lee and Janet Scott Batchelor, I believe, didn't have much experience. So it was basically a writer's block. So what did they do? They bring Oscar winner writer Akiva Goldsman to help write Batman Forever. And, I thought that they did a pretty decent job here. The writing, was the quotes fantastic? Was the writing phenomenal? Was it Chris Nolan worthy? No. Kind of hard to believe, by the way, that this person actually won an Oscar as best writer, but that's aside, another conversation. So now WB wanted to sell more toys, and they wanted more villains, and the reason why they wanted more villains is to sell more toys. So they have Batman, they have Robin, they got to go higher. So Michael Keaton was supposed to come back and reprise his role as Batman, and basically Keaton and Schumacher didn't see eye to eye. I think Keaton saw Batman or the film as more of a darker, whereas Schumacher wanted to make it a bit more lighter. And listen, Schumacher was doing what he was told, right? So that's not a knock. So who did they turn to next? They got, at the time, it was America's darling, Ethan Hawke, who he was considered for the role. He turned it down. And then they looked to Val Kilmer, who was really hot at the time with Tombstone, and he was also in Top Gun, right? He had a couple good films under his belt, and pretty popular. However, he had a reputation for being difficult to work with, and kind of interesting. I watched, I think it's called I Am Val. It was on Prime, and I thought it was interesting because he didn't shy away from talking about how much he hated wearing that suit. He did not enjoy it. But like many people, listen, I hate being if there's a humid place, I complain about it all the time. So I don't blame him for complaining about it's too hot, right? Like some people, it's just they're really sensitive to the heat. I'm probably one of them. And anyway, they brought on Val Kilmer, and Schumacher obviously got assurance that Kilmer would be on his best behavior, according to this documentary. And then we had Robin Williams again. So he's considered for the Joker, now considered for the Riddler. But Robin Williams turned it down, and then they got Jim Carrey, who, again, another hot actor at the time. He just finished doing a movie, Ace Ventura, and then The Mask. So, this guy was everywhere. And at the time, he was on talk shows. He was literally so popular. And then, to play Two-Face, Joel Schumacher just recently finished doing a movie with Tommy Lee Jones. And that's who they hired on, not Billy D or Jimmy D. Williams. It was Tommy Lee Jones. And, the interesting thing, and it's well documented, but Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey did not get along on set. According to reports, they had even Tommy Lee Jones go right up to Jim Carrey and just saying, I hate you. But often their experience was just it was a battle of who's going to take over the screen. So when you got two big alphas, right? It is who wants to basically steal the scene. And the way, you watch every scene, I feel like Jim Carrey plays a loud, He plays an excellent Riddler. I actually really enjoyed his portrayal of Riddler. I could not stand Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face. Hated it. My least favorite out of any portrayal. Anyway, Batman Forever had a $100 million budget. So what was the goal? They needed to make it light. They needed to make it bright. So if you watch that film, you know it's going to be colorful, popping with color, vibrant. And the experience, like, the suit. So then they brought up the suit. And, I feel like it gets such a bad rep for the bat nipples. Rightfully so. But, like, you can't argue that is a nice looking Batman suit. But here's the interesting thing, which I had no idea. I was totally convinced that it was just based on, I think it was, it's in my notes over here, but based on Greek gods and their bodies, which you see it and it's a fantastic physique. However, the suit was based on Greek gods and based on what Jose Fernandez received from Joel Schumacher and someone else. I forget the name right now. They received images as inspiration of gay porn and yes, Greek gods. So he was like, well, okay. So then they had one of the makeup artists at the time. I believe she was an Oscar winner too. Neil. I hope I'm saying the name right. She was like, did Joel even read any Batman comics prior to filming? So that was one of the questions that she kind of raised during that documentary, which I thought was interesting. And that's why I always love, I love having that discussion of, is Matt Reeves, is he the perfect person for the job to film the Batman? And I always just say, absolutely. This guy's a Batman fan through and through. Now, going back to Joel Schumacher. He had pressure. He had to sell toys and obviously make a good film, make sure that the film does well. There was a big issue with Val Kilmer putting on the suit. He couldn't breathe. And, rightfully, the suit got the temperature, I think it was his temperature or his body temperature got as high as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. You walk into anywhere in Texas during the month of August and you be in there for 8 hours filming, right? Highly uncomfortable. Chances are you're going to go back, you're going to go into a nice air conditioned room. Now obviously Val complained a lot. That's what they mentioned in the doc. There was nothing good that he had to say. The only time he actually talked to people is when he wanted to complain about it. Now, Val agreed to shoot his own dialogue, but that was it. So anything extra that was considered from him, and this is where it's you have someone like Danny DeVito who is doing anything asked in order to, show a true portrayal of the Penguin and doing everything it takes, and then you have Val Kilmer who's just like, yeah, I'm just going to do what I have to do and then get out of here. Right? Kind of rubbed people the wrong way. And then obviously Kilmer and Joel Schumacher, what they coin as open warfare. They didn't get along, basically. That said, a lot of the producers, people on set, kind of looked at Joel as listen, this guy's a little wacky, a little lazy. Now, Joel, I thought Joel Schumacher, the way he portrayed it, I thought it was excellent. It had a good tone. Nothing too out there. Obviously, I prefer a much more darker Batman, but I think he pretty much nailed exactly what you could tell. What the studio wanted, he nailed it. The soundtrack, the Batman Forever soundtrack, I loved it. What was it? Hold Me, Kiss Me, Love Me, something like that by U2. Oh, so good. So that was by U2. They had a couple, like Seal, Kissed by a Rose. That song, it has to be in everyone's top 5 Batman song list, right? Soundtrack list. Has to be. That's probably my top 3. No doubt. But that soundtrack was fantastic. And then the movie. So keep in mind, Batman Returns opens at $47 million. And then Batman Forever opens at $70 million opening weekend. which was much more than Batman Returns, and Batman Forever was considered a success, right? Like they made what 25 million more than Batman Returns. That was fantastic. So immediately after the premiere, the studio wanted a fourth installment. So that's where they went to Joel and were like, listen, we immediately want to start production on another Batman film. Listen, and we're going to put not only, like, we want more characters into this film. So first thing they do is like, listen, they ask Val Kilmer, do you want to come back? And pretty much he was quiet about it. Like he didn't even tell the studio anything. He just kind of went off and started filming The Saint. So, you know, the studio kind of got a little upset. Like they're like, listen, like, you know, you could have kind of gave us a heads up. So who did they turn to? Obviously they turned to George Clooney, you know, and he was hot off, you know, his portrayal on ER. You know, he's got a good jawline, handsome fella, and you know, for George Clooney, like he does apologize for his portrayal of Batman, but that was his starting point to stardom as a movie star, right? And it was Batman. Like that was the pinpoint to where he started skyrocketing in terms of success and more movie roles was because of Batman and Robin. So they wanted more characters. Who were they bringing in? Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, Bane, and Batgirl. So Joel's expectation here was, you know, we want Batgirl to wear heels. Like, what? Okay. That's going to be a little difficult. And the tone that Joel Schumacher wanted, they wanted to go a little bit lighter. I don't even know if that's a little bit, but they wanted to go to the 1960s, the campy 1960s. Everything that Michael Uslan did not want from that 1960s show. No disrespect to to that show, because I feel like, you know, there's a lot of good fond memories about those episodes, that show that ran in the 60s. You know, even that, like, I feel like you hear that Batman theme, and I feel like every human being knows that theme more than any other. Anyway, they wanted Ivy, and they wanted good actors and actresses. They wanted big names to bring people in. So I know Patrick Stewart, he was considered for Mr. Freeze at the time, and he couldn't do he couldn't portray him. So who did they turn to? They brought in Arnold Schwarzenegger, again, another big time actor. And then they brought in who was the one that was hot off Pulp Fiction? Uma Thurman, right? Another huge actress that they were bringing in. And then there's obviously Alicia Silverstone, who, you know, her popularity thanks to Clueless, and she was going to play Batgirl. Again, the goal, appeal to kids, make it lighter. Anyway, and then they had Bane. So Bane was created during the Nightfall saga within the comics. And, you know, that was a huge event for DC, huge event for Batman, you know, because obviously Bane goes and breaks Batman's back. And then Bane was basically absolutely wasted in the Batman and Robin film. Like, absolutely useless. He was not smart. He was portrayed as like a dummy. And he was not a threat whatsoever. You know, he was roided up, and obviously, you know, he looked pretty jacked, but that was it, you know. Unfortunately, like, you know, you have an opportunity you have these great name actors and actresses and, like, you know, some pretty good villains, and you make it all campy. Like they were saying, you know, that, you know, Ivy was all about poses, curses, right? Like I hated when she said that. And then you have Mr. Freeze, where he's just dropping all these puns like chill or the Ice Age. You know, like it was just, and it was written by, again, Akiva Goldsman, who, again, Oscar winner, blows my mind, because you watch that film, and listen, right now it's a little bit more bearable because as to what we got after Batman and Robin. Thank goodness for that terrible film, because we got true superhero films. But at the time, they were horrible. Anyway, Bob Greenwood. So he made a blue Batsuit, and Joel was adamant about having a black Batsuit. Obviously, there was a relationship clash because one person wanted one thing, another wanted the other. Now, if you look at George Clooney's Batsuit, it's much more of like a very, very dark navy blue suit. So, it didn't look too bad. It's probably my least favorite, hands down. They had bat nipples on this one too. Like, they just seem to like it. I don't get it. So we have Alicia Silverstone here, fresh off Clueless, and a lot of the people on set were very rude. Like, she was having a hard time, I guess, getting into the suit, and people were calling her large. Like, critics were very vocal as to basically body shaming somebody. And obviously, no one should ever have to body shame someone for what they look like. Like, according to Denise Denovi, like, this girl was a 4. She was tiny, and yet people are body shaming her. It's disgusting. But she carried on with her role. She obviously had a horrible time. Like, there's a lot of times where she was actually in tears as to how she was being treated. And then we have people like, the CGI was coming into play at this point, and Joel wanted to go absolutely bonkers with CGI at the time. Like, this was a new toy, and he's like, yeah, let's go wild with this, which you could see, right? Like, we have Mr. Freeze being used, and there's going to be some CGI that needed to be used. Again, like, I thought he did actually a pretty good job. Like, it looks fairly realistic. The sets look fantastic. There's no arguing about that. It was just, the delivery, the story. What was the story even about? Obviously, Nora Freeze trying to get her back, but like, just, I don't know. It was pretty much a fail right from the word go with that hockey skate scene. Oh, brutal. I'm curious. Like, was that probably the listeners listening right now? Is that your least favorite Batman film? Like, that's got to be mine. I'm trying to think right now, and I think it is. Oh, yeah, definitely. The one thing that they wanted to highlight was George Clooney did not complain whatsoever, even though that the suit was absolutely boiling and absolutely a pleasure to work with. People really enjoyed working with him. Again, Batman Robin, in terms of financial success, was top spot, $42 million. It wasn't the success that Batman Forever got of $70 million, but that was okay. The issue was word of mouth, and it was poor word of mouth. So the audience numbers obviously decreased substantially from poor word of mouth, people not going to see it multiple times, and in the end result was it was $100 million less than what Batman Forever made. And the issue was they hired a guy in Joel Schumacher who didn't know anything about comics. He had too many cooks in the kitchen at this point because, he was he had to do his job. He was forced. He had to make it a certain tone. He had pressure to sell toys, right? Appeal to a certain audience rather than just making a good Batman film. And, I feel like the studio learned its lesson. It wasn't always trying to appeal to selling toys. It's more than just trying to make a good Batman film. And, you talk to George Clooney and you see his movies nowadays. Like, he owns it that was the wrong choice for him, but it was also the right choice. Like, his fame to stardom skyrocketed. There was a fifth Batman film in the talks, but that was obviously scrapped. It was supposed to be called Batman Triumphant. And then and the only reason why was because Batman and Robin absolutely killed the franchise. It was not a success at all. And, did it sell toys? Absolutely. And that's what I'm just about to talk about right now, about, like, what they did. Like, I think I mentioned in a previous podcast where, I remember one Christmas, Batman, was it 1995, 1996, where opening up and like we got something like it was the walkie-talkies of Batman and the Riddler, or even the toys of, there was a dual pack of Batman and Robin. So cool. I still have them to this day, and I love them, right? And like even the Batmobile, how it lit up, it was unbelievable. I absolutely love those toys. Like that Christmas, I remember so fondly. And then you had McDonald's. Like, you want to talk about wicked gimmicks. Like, McDonald's even had those coffee mugs, which you collect. I think it was all four: Batman, Robin, Two-Face, and Riddler. And, like, every single one of them were unique. Like, the one that always stuck out to me that I thought it was wicked was Two-Face. You know, probably my least favorite character in that movie, but what a wicked mug. Like, he had the coins that were, I guess, around the handle, which was pretty sweet. Even Riddler, like, every handlebar, like, I'm just looking it up right now. Like, the handles were all very unique, I thought. Like, the Riddler had more of, like, it looked more, not swishy, but, like, just more of a curve, and kind of remind me of, like, half a check mark. Or a question mark. And then you have Batman, who it looks like he has like a batarang going around. And then same thing with Robin. Pretty sweet. Anyway, love the promotion. And speaking of Robin, I don't even think I mentioned him, but you know, one thing was Chris O'Donnell as Dick Grayson. Yes, you know, you can say, well, this is like a 23-year-old supposed to be playing a kid. But, you know, when they were casting, they didn't want a young little baby to play Robin. And I don't think many fans would want that. I don't know. Personally, I don't. I'm kind of curious to what you guys think. But, like, the way Chris O'Donnell was portrayed, in, especially Batman Forever, you know, was perfect. I loved his interpretation as to who Dick Grayson was. And, like, you know, even like those little moments that Chris O'Donnell had where, like, how are you going to stop me? Like, he had a little bit of an edge. A little bit where it's like, you know, he's already driving a motorcycle. He had that cool little Robin helmet. That moment with Alfred. I always remember that quote: broken wings will mend again, and one day Robin will fly again. Thought it was pretty sweet. But anyway, so when they were trying to cast Chris or Robin, they didn't want no baby. They wanted someone who could be a bit more relatable, a bit older. It kind of made it a bit more believable, right? So, like, again, like, I thought that the casting for Chris O'Donnell was fantastic. And this isn't a separate documentary, but, like, Chris O'Donnell was kind of vocal about how quick, you know, right after Batman Forever, that they wanted to start filming, or, you know, start filming Batman and Robin. Chris O'Donnell was like, this is, like, pretty quick. And although he was on board, it didn't seem like he was too excited. He's like, you know, we're still fresh off this movie. Like, let's give it some time to breathe. But yeah, no, I thought, you know, Batman Forever, you know, it sucks that it kind of gets thrown into with Batman and Robin. But, you know, you go and revisit it. There's a lot of good moments in Batman Forever. Batman and Robin, you know, it is what it is. Some people will say, like, you know, that is very comic book accurate. Which, I mean, you know, that Batman and Robin was, you know, it almost looked like it took place from the 60s in the sense of how they portrayed their characters, right? And it was no different from the 1966 series, where it was kind of campy. It was very campy, actually, right? When you have all these poses, all these puns being thrown around, and then, like, George Clooney's portrayal, just so bad. Anyway, I should highlight. So this is pretty much the end of the podcast, but it was just released yesterday that there is a new Arkham game coming out called Arkham Shadow, which just watched the trailer, and it was about 50 seconds long, and pretty sweet. Pretty excited.
However, it is VR and not on any of the major platforms like PlayStation and Xbox. So, kind of found that strange. I mean, I'm excited. I can't wait to see more clips about this game. I'm all in when it comes to Arkham Batman games. Kind of curious. Rocksteady did Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, and then you have also, it starts with the letter C. Whoever made this, it was this VR game. But anyway, it looks pretty sweet. It looks like the villain is going to be Ratcatcher in this game. So, kind of interested to see what they release. They did say that there's going to be more news about it come June 7th. So, looking forward to that, and I think we're going to be having to cover that. I love the Arkham series. So, anyway, with that being said, this pretty much concludes today's episode. And, looking forward to episodes 5 and 6 from Icons Unearthed Batman, where I'm pretty confident that they're going to be covering Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and Dark Knight Rises. Legendary films. Now, with that said, I mentioned in the beginning of the show, if you want to send an email, any comments, questions, feel free to shoot me an email. BeyondTheBatSignal@gmail.com. Follow me on X/Twitter at Beyond Bat Signal, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can subscribe through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. And please, 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 please rate and review the show, as it helps spread the word. And that is all. So this is Beyond the Bat Signal, signing off.